Rocha Menocal, and I am a Principal Research Fellow at ODI, a leading global affairs think tank based in London. The positive correlation between wealth and democracy is one of the strongest and most enduring relationships in the social sciences. Yet, as strong as this correlation is, it does not mean causation. And few questions have generated as much debate in research, policy, and practice as whether there is a causal link between democracy and development, and if so, in what direction. My chapter on democracy and development, moving beyond the conundrum in this handbook, seeks to disentangle the nature of this relationship. Here are a few of the main highlights that emerge. The relationship between democracy and development is complex and nonlinear. And the question of whether and how regime type matters for development and vice versa is less than straightforward. The evidence shows that democracy does not automatically lead to development, but neither does authoritarian rule. Both democratic and authoritarian regimes alike have had varied and uneven success in supporting and implementing policies that promote inclusive development. Some have done quite well at different times and in different settings, while others have not. For every study supporting the argument that either a democracy or an authoritarian system is more conducive to, if not a precondition for development, another one can be found that makes the opposite claim. One key implication from the above is that the dichotomy between democracy and development is too stark, and that the regime type development nexus may not be the right puzzle to focus on. If in addition we take into account the fact that there has been a formidable shift towards formal electoral democracy that has taken place across the world since the 1980s, and that many of these democracies have yet to become deeply rooted because of difficulties they confront in addressing the needs, priorities, and expectations of their populations, especially in a context of growing inequalities and exclusion, the more pressing question to be asking may no longer be whether one type of regime is superior to the other in terms of performance, but rather how democracy can deliver prosperity and well-being more effectively in ways that are more inclusive and broadly shared, so as to become more resilient and sustainable over time. As part of this, it is essential to look at how different democracies work and why. What kinds of institutional arrangements are in place in a particular setting, and how do these determine the way in which policies intended to promote development work in actual practice? Political settlements and the power dynamics that undergird them are instrumental in this respect because they define the prospects and boundaries of what kind of change may be possible. Since the 1980s, the world has experienced a profound transformation, becoming both more open and more prosperous. While in 1985, more than half of the countries in the world were under authoritarian rule, most countries today are considered formal electoral democracies. And all but 5, China, Eritrea, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, have held elections at the national level since 2000. At the same time, tremendous progress has been made on improving the well-being of those who are most in need. According to the World Bank, for example, almost 1.1 billion people were lifted out of extreme poverty between 1990 and 2015, while enormous strides have also been made in areas including health and education, at least prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet the ability of democratic systems to deliver, both economically and socially, remains mixed at best. Moreover, while poverty levels have improved globally since the 80s, inequality between countries has declined considerably. Inequality within countries is at a historic high. There are growing pockets of populations who are consistently left behind and excluded from crucial services and opportunities that are essential for their well-being, often along multiple and intersecting group-based inequalities. In this chapter of the handbook, I argue that inequality is democracy's catch-22. Let me explain what I mean by this. On the one hand, inequality profoundly undermines the quality and resilience of democratic governance. Inequality and the fears of social decline and exclusion that it generates feeds social polarization and the shrinking of a vital moderate center. Inequality and exclusion create imbalances in voice, representation, opportunity, and access that disenfranchise segments of the population, undermine trust in and support for democratic institutions, and increase support for populism, extremism, and even violent conflict, particularly among young people. So if democracy is to prove resilient over time, it needs to address and redress inequality and exclusion. However, there is nothing about democracy that automatically tackles such inequalities. And in effect, many of democracy's built-in features may make it harder for it to do so. This is why inequality is democracy's catch-22. Addressing inequality and social exclusion is not only a technical, but also a deeply political process involving negotiation, bargaining, and contestation among a variety of actors who are committed to promoting inclusion and reducing inequalities to varying degrees. The very struggle against inequality is illustrative. Historically, as research shows, some of the greatest strides against inequality and exclusion have been achieved not through democratic politics and decision-making, but through far more controversial and even perverse means, including authoritarian coercion, mass violence, war, and indeed pandemics. Yet, as I argue in my chapter, there is also hope. While tackling inequality is challenging, different democratic systems have managed to make headway on this front at different times in different settings. And the chapter outlines some of the key factors that have made a difference to enable this progress, even if progress remains uneven and nonlinear. Thank you.